My name's Ken Bolan. I've been in the antique industry now for, believe it or not, 50 years. My biggest company within that period was a company called Talisman, which started in the West Country in the early 80s and ended up in London in King's Road until 3 or 4 years ago. And now today you're sitting in my studio, which is now back in the West Country. It's been an incredible journey, and my only thing I've had to do is spend money. It's been the ideal concept for a woman to go shopping, and that's all I've ever done. I just shop. My car life existence started before the antiques business. So I was actually living in Switzerland in 1968, 69, working in a garage, and I met this Swiss guy. As it happens, he was looking at a magazine called Motorsport, which I don't even know if it still exists, but he looked at the adverts in the back of the magazine and he said, "Can you just buy these cars?" I said, "As long as you pay for them." He said, "Can you take them back home?" And I said, "Of course you can." So a week later he called me up and he said, "Can we go and buy cars in London?" So the three of us left, and we bought, that weekend we bought a 1936 Bentley. We bought a 1928 Alvis single-seater racing car that was obviously made up, but it was glorious, and a 1950 4M GTF. And the three of us set off to drive all the way back to Switzerland. And that's how my interest in cars began. A year later I left Switzerland and I started dealing in vintage cars. I realized I had to leave the car business when I was offered a 1936 Jaguar SS 100 and a Type 35 Bugatti from the same owner. The Bugatti was £6,000 and the Jaguar was £4,000, and at that time it was money beyond my conception. That was 1970. I went on the road for a bit and I ended back in Switzerland, and I looked at the antiques business and I realised what I could do with it, so I opened my first shop in Switzerland. So it's been a hell of a journey, and over that period of time I found many cars, because I've obviously been called out to look at estates for probate or people moving on, moving out, and quite often I've walked in and thought, that's an interesting place. My quest for speed hasn't been enough. I've driven various cars at ridiculous speeds over the years. Did a little bit of stock car racing as a teenager. Had a little bit of track experience. One of my most memorable ones was I was invited to drive a 1965 Corvette on a rally, and I was pretty snobbish about it. I said, "You know, I don't drive American cars." And the owner said, "Please drive this car for us." So I did drive the car, and 3 days into the rally I said, "If the car ever becomes available, I want to buy it, because this thing would do 5 miles an hour or 120 miles an hour sideways on a racetrack." And I owned that car for the next 20 years. I don't own anything these days in that type, because a decade ago I married an American woman who produces this English program called Peaky Blinders, and believe it or not, she doesn't like speed. And we also live down here in the West Country, and the lanes are minuscule. I'm not terribly good on computers, but this MGTC came up on eBay, and for some ridiculous reason I got interested in it, though I'm not interested in TCs. But this one was 1948, had been in a garage since 1957, and had 5,000 miles on the clock when it was for sale in Miami. And that intrigued me. I thought, what's a car like this going to look like, having done such little mileage in its life? So the long and the short of it, I bought the car, had it transported to England, and I called a friend of mine in who might be able to help me on who I could advise on getting it restored, because I wanted to do a museum restoration on it. I didn't want it looking brand new in any way, shape or form. I wanted to keep the patina it had acquired over that period. So I was introduced to this young guy called Andy Hopkins. He came to look at the car, And also in the garage at the time was this 61 Alfa Romeo Giulietta that Karen had bought to go rallying in. And don't forget, this is a woman that doesn't like speed, but she was a single American woman come to Britain. She wasn't looking for speed, she was looking for a man. So she thought rallying's probably a good way to find somebody. But by the time I saw the Alfa Romeo, it was a rust box. So Andy's sitting in my garage looking at the TC, understanding completely what I wanted to do with it. And I said to him, it's a shame about the Alfa that we can't do anything with that. And he said, no, I can restore that car. And I said, Andy, if you can restore that car, you should be in business for yourself. Because at that time he was employed by a company. And we left it at that. 2 days later, Andy called me and said, if you give me the 2 cars, I'll start my own business. He restored the Alfa over a 5-year period beautifully. It cost a ridiculous amount of money, but that's not his fault. It was the state of the car. He did a great job on the TC, which you'll see briefly shortly. And then he called me up one day and said, there's a car that you ought to come and see. So he arranged for me to meet him at this place called Guy's Marsh Prison. I was introduced to this lady called Linda White, and she had a load of cars around her property. Not that you could get near the property, because Linda and her late husband were incredible hoarders everywhere. But eventually a tarpaulin was removed, and underneath was sitting this aluminium racing car, as far as I could see. I knew nothing about it. She had quite a lot of history on it, and her husband had bought it, I believe, in the early 60s. He'd used it as a road car until such time that it wasn't viable any longer, and I think it had been under that tarpaulin for 25 to 30 years. I offered Linda a price for the car, which she at that time said to me ultimately, I don't actually want to sell the car for money, but I want my studio rebuilt. And I naively and glibly said, I'll rebuild your studio for the car, which is what happened over a 6-month period, hence the Leonard. Well, initially to get to the car, to actually unveil it, was difficult. We had to clear quite a lot of stuff. And then ultimately when we took the tarpaulin off it, I knew it was something extremely special. It is sitting very low on its wheels at the moment, so I wasn't actually sure the scale of the car, but again, it was just such a beautiful piece. And I'm in the antiques and art business. It was also a wonderful piece of art and an extraordinary looking car. And it was also a car I thought, I can restore that body myself, because I used to be a car sprayer. The history of the car, Linda actually had quite a lot of history that she'd put together, and her husband. So I did know that when it had been raced by this young chap called Bristow, and how successful he'd been with the car and its very early history. And then I believe that's thereafter that Linda's husband purchased the car, because the car was advertised in some magazine at some point. So that's really the only history I had of it, and the inkling. I was more interested in who made the car. My first thoughts on seeing the car was obviously how I could go about restoring it. And then my second thoughts was, what racetrack do I take it with? And my third thought, are you capable of driving this car properly? If the car is restored to racetrack specification, I want to be first in the queue to drive it. But I suspect I won't be allowed by all the people that are helping me to restore it, because my initial thoughts, if I can do this car myself, and with a lot of help from Andy, was probably quite naive. It's a very special vehicle, and it needs the right people doing the work on it. Andy's totally capable of that, but I haven't got the time to see it through. But I'd still have to race it. I've viewed the car and its patination effect for 3 or 4 years now, so I've gone through lots of emotions. Should it just become a work of art? I think to put it back on the racetrack, you've got to put it back the way it was conceived in 1955. There's obviously mechanical restorations to be done throughout the car, and I just feel once you've achieved that, to give the car its true beauty, you've got to forget the patination it has now and take it to the front of the line and make it proud again.